Hello, this is your executive director, Angelia, and we're on part 2 of Healing Families' Lives, and this is in cooperation with Works of Heart, Self-Esteem and Growth Skills for Teens, Presentation and Audience Participation Program. This is something that we would go to around the schools, churches, other organizations. Excuse me while I straighten my camera stuff out here. And we left off talking about physical growth, how the changes in the teens' valuing of the family versus their peers, and outside adults, how, the family becomes less important and their peers and outside adults become more important in their lives. So we're going to start on the first 2 years of high school. Sexuality. Sexuality is going to happen to a teenager. That's just a biological fact. And so you need to, get your little 3 volunteers, if you remember from the first part, up and talk about, have they learned anything about themselves? And, you have to be prepared for the answers. In the school, you have to, let the school, like I said, I'd give them the school a copy of this up front so they know what was going to be talked about and they could ask questions if they needed to. And some are not so much okay with talking about it, but most of the counselors understand this is a subject that's going to come up. And so, then you can say, the most important thing about your sexuality is that you identify it and that you practice safe sex at this age if you're going to have sex, because that's the most important thing. Otherwise, they'll have to be taking my teen pregnancy life coaching program. Dealing with increased expectations. The first 2 years of high school, they're going to deal with increased expectations. The homework almost doubles. I remember some nights my sons would have an hour or more worth of homework, and I would think that's just ridiculous, to put on these kids. But, they complain the instruction time is not enough in class to get these subjects done and, stuff like that. But, they're going to have more responsibility expected of them. They're going to have to act like young adults. They're going to have to, like I said, meet the challenges of their schoolwork. And, some of them rebel pretty hard because they're just not emotionally ready. And some of them are pretty, with the program, follow along. Every kid is different. Confronting increased risks. Of course, your first 2 years in high school, there are going to be people who are going to try to get you to try drugs and alcohol, and have unprotected sex, So those are increased risks. And they might want to hang around the cool kids and end up out in a car, and end up tagging, spray painting, on walls or vandalizing cars or, abandoned houses or what have you. So, you need to talk about that there's going to be increased risks, confronting them. And then if they're smart, they're not going to engage in risky behavior. Turn my page here. Continued balancing the level of investment in family, peers, and outside adults. First 2 years of high school, they realize that their family is important, and they do want to have a relationship with them. And again, the peers are going to be the number one source that they're in with, and then other outside adults, teachers or counselors, whoever. So they're learning how to balance that. And so you're going to want to talk to them, about that, like maybe you can pick days, like Friday night, you're out with your friends or your girlfriend. Saturday, you're out with your friends. Sunday, you spend time at home with your family. Just find a balance so that, you have healthy relationships. The last 2 years of high school, because there's a pretty big gap if you look at pictures of freshmen and sophomores and then juniors and seniors, there's a big physical difference between when you're a freshman and when you're a senior in high school. You come in looking like this little kid, you leave looking like this adult. Some of the guys, have beards and mustaches and stuff. So there's a big difference between 14 and 18. Consolidating prior tasks, getting your stuff together. Anything that, you didn't get done mentally or emotionally or, physically, Now's the time to get that, in order. You know, things that you need to think about is, time management. Like, how do I get this homework done? Do I do it before dinner, after dinner, still have time to go out with my friends and hang around? They need to think about these things. Emerging sense of identity. So they're going to start figuring more and more about who they are. And you can have your 3 representatives stand up and, ask them, how has your sense of identity grown, in the past couple of years? And they can tell you, and then other people will have that to think about, and the sense of continuity. Are you starting to see how your life started at point A and went point B? Are you seeing how your life, is on a continuous line, and you pretty much follow this line throughout your life, and things are, continuous, and you're not going to just like drop off the edge of the world and, be lost. You fall off track every now and then, but you get yourself back on track, hopefully. That's, one of the personal harmony programs, coaching programs I used to teach, is how to get your life back on track. Need for control over their own life. As they become juniors and seniors, they need to have control over their own life. Now, I'm not saying you let them stay out all night. You still have to parent them to help them make good decisions for themselves. But they can choose, what they're going to wear within a reason, where they're going to go with who, within reason. Of course, you want to still protect them at this age because they're still impulsive. And you can talk about, that. Separation. They're getting ready to turn 18. Some of them might move out and go to college. Some of them might move out to their own place. You can have your representatives talk about what do they think is going to happen? How are they going to separate from their parents? Because some kids have not even thought about that yet. Some of them don't think about that until the day after they graduate and say, oh gosh, I'm now out of high school. What happens now? So, you're going to put that into their minds. Autonomy. They're going to have to do things for themselves. They're going to have to get themselves up in the morning, get themselves washed and dressed in the morning, get themselves off to work or school in the morning, on time, and then, make time for other things. So they're going to have to be thinking about that, their own autonomy. And you can have people stand up and say how they have, started to prepare for this, because some of them in the audience will not have started to prepare for this, and they need to be thinking about this. Transition. It's a transition. The day they walk across that stage and they get their diploma, or nowadays with the COVID, which is such a shame, get their diploma in the mail or whatever. That's a transition. Just like from middle to high school, now you're going from high school to a more adult world. You go to college or trade school or get the job that you wanted. That's a transition. And then the next transition is going to be, being on their own. They're going to be living without you there, hovering over them. And they're going to have to be able to act like an adult. So you can ask, your representatives, how have you prepared for the transition from, teenager to adulthood? And they can tell you. And then the other kids in the audience can be thinking about that, because I guarantee you some of them haven't thought about that yet. Things you should be doing or thinking about at this age, because there are some who are, a little slower developmentally, mentally or emotionally, physically even. And so there are things they need to be thinking about if they haven't already. Developing a stable body image. This is what I look like. This is me. Because if they've still been struggling, trying to diet and then, binge purge and all that, they might not have a stable body image. They understand this is me, this is what I look like, so that's something they need to work on. And, encourage healthy eating, healthy exercise, and remind them that these magazine ads with these women in it, they're airbrushed, they did a show on this where one of the girls, the models, was talking about how, this was not her, that they elongated the legs digitally in this picture, and they've Megan Trainor got upset and wouldn't allow a picture to be done because they digitally slimmed her and gave her more of a curve in a picture. So these pictures in the magazines that these girls are looking at and being depressed, like, I don't look like that, I'm not a good, worthy person because I don't look like that. They're looking at a false ideal. And no one does look like that. I've done a modeling shoot. The amount of makeup that they put on you is ridiculous. It leaves you clawing your face off for like 3 days because it's just so bad. But, they're not fake. They're real, and they need to value that and be happy with themselves. A sense of control over their body. They need to have that. Unfortunately, if they were sexually abused, they don't have that. They don't feel like they are in control of their body. Other people have been in control of their body, whoever was doing this to them. So they need to have boundaries there. I am in control of my body. This is my body. I choose what I put into it, and they need to make good choices there. I choose how much I exercise. I choose, who I share my body with. And they need to know that, because some of them don't know that. Managing their emotions. We're all going to have emotions. That's a fact of life. They need to learn how to manage them. So you might have 3 representatives come up and say, ask them, how have you managed your emotions, the past couple years? And then that can give the other kids, something to think about. Impulses. How do you manage your impulses? And again, you can have your representatives say how they manage theirs, and that can get the other kids thinking. Because when they're teenagers, they're still impulsive. They still, make a lot of impulsive decisions. And sometimes that's good if you're being spontaneous and having fun, but sometimes that's not so good. Personal behavior. At this age, they need to be accountable for their personal behavior. So that's something you need to ask, how have you taken steps to be in charge of your own personal behavior? And because that's something the other kids need to be thinking about. Because as an adult, you're expected to behave like an adult in a civil, decent manner. Now, I know society's changing and it's not as big a deal as it used to be, but it's still a big deal, especially if you're going to go into business or, somewhere that you're expected to be a professional. They have to be able to behave like a professional. Now, personally, something that puts me off right away is cussing. Now, the generation younger than me doesn't think that's such a big deal. But in my day, if you were that vulgar that you had to use those words, it means you didn't have the knowledge to use other words to describe things. You were considered a base person if you did that. So, they need to be accountable for their own personal behavior. Don't act like a fool all the time. Don't go around cussing like a sailor. Don't be putting your hands on anyone because, the boomer generation is, kind of touchy. But my generation is like, no, you don't touch me. You can be actually charged with sexual harassment if you touch some people, and it's not welcome. So, they have to know where there's lines, and they have to be in charge of their own personal behavior, because mom and dad aren't looking over their shoulder anymore and say, hey, so-and-so, don't do that. They need to be accountable for their own personal behavior. Strengthening personal accountability. Again, they need to know you can't bluff and lie your way through life. If you did a thing, you're going to have to be accountable for it. And you better have an answer. And, even if people don't believe your answer or don't like your answer, whatever, you need to still be accountable for your own actions. And that's called, being a decent person again, having consideration, and, being accountable for your own actions. A sense of responsibility. There are going to be things they're responsible for. So you might ask, how have you developed a sense of responsibility in the past couple of years? And have your representatives say, and that gives the other kids to think about, oh, I'm going to be responsible for my own life. I better start thinking about these things. Solidifying, satisfying peer relationships. some people might not be the best at making friends. Some people are just plain old antisocial. But they need to practice because, we all want friends. We want to have friends to talk to and go out and do stuff with. So to have a satisfying peer relationship, you need to have communication. You need to have a two-way street of communication, treating each other well, not being disrespectful. I had some friendships where that was kind of not going on. I look back and I see, wow, this person really just was verbally abusive to me all the time, and it was all about their needs, and I was never considered in this friendship. And I had one friend who just kind of cussed me out on a regular basis, but that was the way it was then. So I look back and I think, wow, I really wouldn't even consider that person a friend of mine now. So you want good, healthy relationships. If a person is mentally or emotionally abusing you or physically abusing you, I used to have a friend a long time ago. He used to, frog people all the time. And I'm like, looking back, it's like, no. So, they need to be able to set boundaries, but they also need to be able to communicate effectively and realize that a relationship is a two-way street. It can't always be about you. It sometimes has to be about them, and they need to learn that. Handling sexuality. Okay. They're going to be in sexual situations. They're a young adult. Hormones are up there. It's going to happen. They have to be able to handle that. Now, some survivors of sexual abuse are going to have a problem. They might act out sexually, or they might be sexually repressed. So, if they aren't there yet, they could probably get some counseling. If not at the school, then, in a counseling center where they can get the help they need. And then handling intimacy. Intimacy is not the same as sex. Intimacy is having a one-on-one relationship, sharing yourself with another person, and another person sharing themselves with you. You can have intimate family members, intimate friends, intimate relationship. Intimacy does not mean sexuality. And that's where a lot of younger people get confused. They think being intimate means, ooh, but it doesn't. Developing personal values. And you might want to ask, since you've come into high school, what personal values have you developed? And have your representatives tell you, and then that gives the kids listening something to think about. Because you do have to have personal values. Otherwise, you're just going to be a total, all over the place person with a lot going on.